And I'm going to say something really controversial. The indie space is unforgiving. You're only as good as your last role. You have to prove yourself if you step back to come back in.
Hi, I'm Teresa. Welcome to Cocoon Cast, where we deep dive into movies and discuss all things cinema.
Hi, I'm Rebecca. Today we'll be discussing the new movie, Saltburn.
Let's get started.
When Oliver Quick is invited to his classmate Felix Catton's home for the summer, he soon finds himself in the chaotic world of their family, particularly that of Lady Elspeth. Before long, Oliver starts to question the eccentricities of life at Saltburn, but then ponders a different question. Why would he want to leave?
Rebecca, you were excited about this movie. It was billed as, modern Gothic literature on film.
My sweet spot.
I'm a sucker for modern Gothic literature. What are you even talking about?
Hey.
And talk to us about it.
I was really excited. I loved Emerald Fennell's Promising Young Woman. I thought it was a nice twist on the revenge thriller. I was really excited to see where she went next, especially since she said, I want to take my own Gothic story and transplant it to a little bit in the distant past.
Wow. And she wrote and directed this movie?
That's correct. Par for the course for her.
Wow. And so how'd she do with the story? How'd the story go for you?
I've spent a lot of time in this literature space, so there are definitely moments where it's a little tropalicious, and you're like, I've seen
I'm
this
sure
one.
that's a word. I'm sure that's a word.
It is now. It felt a little familiar in some ways, but in some ways, I loved how she took inspiration for other sources. There's a film that I'm going to mention that you may be surprised that I'm going to be comparing it to.
Oh, come on now. You've got to tell.
The Talented Mr. Ripley.
Oh, I remember that with Matt Damon.
Yes, and Jude Law.
Yes, I remember that. That's an interesting comparison. Well, it fits.
Well, it's all about you come into this world and do you want to stay in it? Do you want to leave in it? Do you change yourself or do other people change around you?
You made an interesting point about it. Well, first of all, I don't know this space. Literally, I don't know this space. You're like, I know this space. It's familiar. It's funny. I don't know this space specifically. And I'll be honest with you, going into this movie, oftentimes I'm like, oh, I remember the trailer. Oh, I've heard a little bit of a press release. This is coming out. Nothing, literally, other than you're like, we have to go see this.
I am so excited we saw this. I'm so glad we saw this.
I'm glad we saw this. However, I felt it was very familiar and not just the Talented Mr. Ripley piece. And I do recall that one, and I don't think that's a horrible comparison. I'm like, yeah, okay, I'll give you that one.
Once you see the movie, you'll understand more of what I'm talking about.
Oh, no, and I don't disagree with that. However, it was predictable to me.
Yeah, that was my only caveat is some of the source material is so familiar to me. There's some things I'm like, oh, come on, please, why? Mm-hmm. I remember you and I were discussing on our ride back to the studio that there are several different ways that I was expecting it to go.
And yet it went none of those ways, which says something about that. The writing, I thought, was reasonable for what it was. It was pretty smart, not too many words.
The character work is solid. And that helps with the cast. The cast is awesome.
Oh, and you know my buddy? You know who I was super excited about who was in this movie?
Our guy, Archie Madikwe, correct?
Oh, well, no, I liked him too. And he was Gran Turismo last. He's quite an actor, I will say. He wasn't who I was thinking of. However, I really liked his part. And he didn't have a major part, but every scene he was in, I enjoyed and was very believable to me, his character.
I love how Archie spent his time in Gran Turismo. Like, you feel such empathy for the character. You want to carry the character on your shoulders, as it were.
I know what I'm doing. I'm not afraid. I've raced this track 1,000 times in the game. Let me drive it my way.
That was actually pretty great.
And this character, you're just like, you go sit in the corner. I want nothing to do with you.
Oh, you don't like him at all.
Oh, nice. Tux.
Thank you.
Wow. It's a rental, right?
But he's interesting, though, because he's layered, because you start to wonder, is he telling the truth about this place?
There is a piece where it feels a little suspensey.
One of the characters, and I think this is the person that you were most excited to see, Lady Elspeth, played by Rosamund Pike,
Yes.
gives us this fuel to start to speculate and wonder what's really going on.
Oh, bliss. Bliss, bliss, bliss. Oh, this song. God, I haven't heard this song in forever. I used to hang out with them all, actually, when I was modelling.
And then you have Archie's character come in and start to add this fuel to the fire. I was watching a video, I want to say last night, about how Hobie Brown in the Spider-Verse films is presented as superficial Hobie versus actualized Hobie. And I think we see that with Archie's character quite well. It's a little bit tough to do in a physical exercise like this, but I think they did it well.
I would say, and it's true, Rosamund Pike, wonderful actress. And I don't think I would say she's underrated because she is well acclaimed. But she's done so many really wonderful works. A Private War is one of my absolute favorite movies. State of the Union, I remember you had been more at the house during that time. And we were watching her and our other person that we like so much.
Chris O'Dowd, yes.
Yeah, it was hilarious. They're just like in this little coffee shop having these discussions. And to me, she had a lot to say. She had some really quirky lines. She was very memorable. And granted that there was some goodwill in there going, oh, I really want to see her. And the lead, who actually turned out to be not at all what you would have thought, Barry.
I love Barry Keoghan as Oliver in this film. I think he adds a little bit of a kind of an intense edge that you don't really find in protagonists like this.
It sounded so romantic, and I don't know the Russian word for horse, so I sort of thought it sounded like lovely poetry. Daddy always said I'd end up at the bottom of the Thames.
So far, so good.
They're pretty much one note, and that's why I like films like Crimson Peak and this film that kind of turn it on its head, start to go, what happened?
His character unfolds. He does this, and I don't want to put any spoilers out there.
No.
But how he starts is definitely not how he ends, and I'm not sure if you're going to know necessarily how it ends. I felt, because it was familiar, I had a pretty good understanding of where I believed it was going to end, but I don't think the movie gave too many clues as to where it was going to go.
The other thing the casting department did that was really smart is they really played into audiences' expectations for these actors.
Barry Keoghan was in Dunkirk, and he was a nice guy. He was also in the Banshees of Inisherin, and he was a nice guy there. You felt so bad for him. He was really having a hard go at life, which this is how this movie starts. His character, Oliver Quick, which is an interesting name, because you think of Oliver Twist and Quick,
right?
And I
and then
just
some
wonder,
of the choices that come out of that.
Yes,
Again, there's so many layers to this movie. I can't wait to unpeel them all with everybody when they go see it.
You want to talk about spoilers.
Oh,
I can tell right now you want to discuss. Comment below if you've seen this movie. Talk about the layers. Tell us what you thought, which characters. Did you see it going any specific place? And I would just say, please, no spoilers, at least on this review, until our cinema community has seen it.
I'd also be curious to see if our cinema community would comment below what layers stuck out to you. I know for me, a lot of it was the visual language that was communicated in this film.
Rebecca, and I know you talked a lot about color. The pink, the green, the red, lots of colors. The sculpture was used, I thought, very artfully as well to tell the story.
That's one of the things I loved about this movie is there was vibrance, there was life. It wasn't desaturated. If it was in certain sequences, there was a point to it. But there's always this visible presence of color. So it was a beautiful movie in that respect.
Set design is always my weakness, clearly. And as they were going through Saltburn, the estate, they were pointing out paintings and tapestries and just the windows, the phenomenal views. I was in love with that. And I was really thankful that they chose not to saturate those scenes.
And yet at the same time, you could feel the careful touch.
Yes, and it was interesting too to me because it's an estate. What 1300s? This home was built.
This is an old house, to say the least.
Right. It's not like, hey, I live in an old house. Like, oh, hey, this one. And they had said how many generations had lived in this estate prior. But I appreciated the fact that it wasn't just crammed with things. You could literally pick out different pieces. And that may feel small, but to me, it set the tone, the shadows, the darkness, and then the windows and the light. There was one scene where they were rushing to shut curtains to make it dark.
But still, there was that vibrant usage of color in that scene.
I would agree. Well, correct. The red just really illuminated. I think they did a great job with that part. And the cinematography, I think, also was really impressive.
Spotlight to Susie Davies, the production designer of this film.
Yes,
you had your
absolutely.
work cut out for you, and I'd love to pick your brain at some point of all the neat little details that you did.
Linus Sandgren did the cinematography, and he's done multiple things. Babylon,
Love Babylon.
No Time to Kill. Quite the variety. But that was pretty powerful. It didn't feel intrusive. It felt when it needed to come close, it did when it needed to back up. It felt very expansive in some places to me.
And I thought that was interesting considering that when you watch this movie, this is not a standard camera ratio. This is specifically designed to be a little bit more box friendly.
Yes, I would agree with that as well.
It's really interesting to me to also see Jacob Elordi in this film coming off watching Priscilla a few weeks earlier. He's really taken this trajectory and started creeping into the indie space.
It was funny to me because when we first talked about that, like I said, I wasn't thinking who's in the movie at that point. It took me a while, I'll be honest with you. For me, we just saw Priscilla just a few weeks ago. For me to go, he's Elvis. He's Elvis.
That's the same guy.
At least I didn't stand up in the theater and go, he's Elvis.
Thank you for saving me the embarrassment.
Exactly. I'm all, shh, don't say anything. But it made me laugh that he's that versatile of an actor where it didn't hit me that it was him. And I was thankful because I didn't want to think, boy, Elvis is an entitled guy in this huge estate and he's friends with Ed.
I mean, Elvis was an entitled guy in a huge estate.
Exactly. Right. I know. There's a stretch. Thank you very much for coming. I appreciated the fact I didn't know. I appreciated the fact that he was able to transcend that role enough.
I agree. I've seen Jacob in Euphoria, so it's kind of funny seeing him jump from role to role now.
The challenge is always, like you said, the indie space isn't as large. And there are going to be actors and actresses that we know, love, appreciate, some that are new to us. But it's, are they able to transcend the last role that you may have really loved into a new role where you don't know?
And I'm going to say something really controversial. The indie space is unforgiving. You're only as good as your last role. You have to prove yourself if you step back to come back in.
Wow.
Because you are playing with not just the livelihood of a smaller studio. These are small, dedicated crews.
Absolutely. And I think they all did a wonderful job with that. Do we have any questions from the box?
The director, Emerald, talked about placing the film in the recent past to strip the veneer of it. What did the director mean by that, and do you think that it worked?
The box is referring to a specific interview that Emerald, the director, did where she said, I want to place this film in the past because I want to strip the veneer of it. I want to take the sentimentality off of it. I think that helps. When I'm looking at this film initially, what I see are big, giant, Juicy Couture photo shoots from like 2004 with the big bows and everything. I think this kind of adds a little bit of roughness because we've already lived through this time period. So I think it helps the story because we're already coming into a space of nostalgia. But when we see the nostalgia taken away, it starts to kind of seep into how we're perceiving the characters emotionally and their decisions from a more raw place instead of, that's how they used to do it.
I would find it interesting because it started in 2006. That was the graduation. You're a little bit older than that. You graduated a little bit before that. I would say that's closer to your time frame than my time frame. Did it feel like I did laugh? Somebody had, the juicy pants. I'm like, oh, I remember that when you were in high school. Those were the thing. But in general, did it feel that way to you that person could be your not your equal, but your, peer that you may have went to school or college with?
It's interesting because I feel like the Saltburn based characters were more like that. I spent a lot of time engaging in visual media and also music at that point. I pointed out to you several needle drops that were in that, and I think artfully used, honestly.
Correct. That's fair.
But I think it's interesting to see that from the outside in.
Do we have any other questions from the box?
The movie's an indie release, meaning it's not wide release yet. Do you think it's going to get legs and go wide, or do you think it's going to be a challenge?
I think that this movie has a chance to get legs, given that Emerald's previous feature won Best Original Screenplay the year that it came out. Realistically, this is going to be a little bit of a hard sell. I think in the indie space, this will clean up nicely. Outside of that, it's going to have to get nominated for some awards in order to have more legs.
I would agree with that. I don't know what the budget was for this movie, which I actually looked for just to understand. Wondering how much would it need to make, and I understand that all the factors that go into that as well. But for me, it's indie, but in our area, it's playing at the local AMCs, playing at the local Cinemark, some of the smaller theaters. It's pretty big in this area.
But we live in an indie-friendly area.
That is correct. And so I would say, I'm wondering, but it surprised me that some of the bigger chains, and it's not just one chain picked it up, it's all the big chains in the area picked it up, as well as the smaller theaters versus, smaller theater. I do wonder if it's based on who's in it, who wrote it, who directed it. But I would agree with you. I think it's less mainstream, even though it's somewhat predictable to me.
I would point out that I'm going to say your least favorite S word.
Oh.
The strike happened.
Yes, that's
so
true.
I think that's delayed a lot of productions that were in the can or almost done.
Okay, that makes sense why that may be here, even in our area, even in the indie-friendly area that we're in. That's fair. I just don't know if it's for everyone. There's a lot of sexual content. There's a ton of drug and alcohol use, violence. There's a lot going on in this movie. I don't know if that's for the average person, to be honest with you, or the average person wants to see it in such a quantity. It's 131 minutes. It's a lot going on.
You also have to keep track of character motivations. I know there's a YouTuber I follow. He says character quality is quantity, but sometimes there's just too much to breathe.
I felt there was too much to breathe on this one. On that happy note, let's talk about moth rating.
The moths are back.
The moths are back. You seem so surprised. Every week, you seem surprised.
Moth jump scare right here.
1 to 5, 1 to 5. What do you think, Miss Rebecca?
I originally was talking with you and I discussed giving this a 3 and a wing. The more that I've spent time with it, this is a 4 moth movie for me.
Whoa! It actually increased.
It did, because I started thinking about all of the other stories, and it's hard to tell this kind of story well without boring the audience to death.
Wow.
Every character, even some of the more minor characters, I received their vantage point quite nicely. I was able to see how they were feeling. And again, the attention to detail really sold the movie for me. It's the script. It's not too heavy, but you can still feel how the characters are doing. It's the choices that they make that solidify the characters. They're consistent. I know we talked about Wish, that you felt like there's a gap in the characters. Here, even though there's some plot twists and turns, you never feel like you're betraying the core of the character.
I'm just laughing when you're saying the character stayed the same in Wish. Valentino was an average goat, and then all of a sudden he's a talking goat.
I'm talking. I am talking. Ha! Who knew my voice would be this low?
But that's not what we're saying here. He was consistent even as a talking goat. I would give this a 3.
I'm listening.
I'm laughing.
I'm listening. Are we going to have another Beau is Afraid situation?
And the moths have left the building. I would say it's a solid 3. It's above average, as you said, the attention to detail, the actors and actresses I did enjoy. It was well cast. The set design, phenomenal. The cinematography, very good. However, it felt bloated to me. It was, you've introduced the character, you've told me a little bit about the character. Oh, wait, and then you're going to tell me more and tell me more and tell me more. And what was... the extra space didn't feel like it was developing the characters. It just felt, as I was telling you, it felt as if...
More of the same?
More of the same. And some of the same was, hey, we're just lounging around, drinking a ton and smoking and just hanging out. And I don't know that I needed that to the level. It didn't add anything to the characters to me. It's just like, okay, they're just really lounging. Oh, wow, they are just wealthy beyond it, and they're just hanging out for more. It didn't do anything for me.
I understand that. And sometimes that's just the difference of story choices of how we perceive them. That's why I want our cinema community to comment below. How are you seeing this movie?
Well, we know.
Not just in the theater.
Correct. But I agree with this thought. The directing was fine. The acting, it was above average in my mind. But to say, hey, it's a 4, it's a 5... I just have
I'm not at 5 yet, but...
Yeah, no, I've just seen better indie movies. And as I was saying earlier, the storyline was very familiar. And I'm having a hard time finding the extra that was like, ooh, this was surprising. Oh, this was interesting. And granted, we see a ton of movies. We both read a ton. However, it just... and the fact that you said, oh, it feels like the talented Mr. Ripley. I'm like... Yeah, that story's been told and written about as well. And if it feels very similar to that, I go,
But I can see where she pulled her influences from. I had to think about the talented Mr. Ripley comparison.
Sure, and that's a good thing. Well, I had to think about it was Elvis, so I think we're
Take
even.
turns, huh?
Exactly. You're like, I didn't think about that. It wasn't a terrible movie. It's worth a watch, I think. But I think going into it, it would be important to know, hey, what is in there that's helpful and what's not helpful? And could they have told the story either differently, a little bit shorter? It sounds possible in my mind.
There's definitely some storytelling choices that I would have made differently.
Absolutely.
But I feel like my choices wouldn't affect the movie in the sense that it wouldn't make it a better movie than it already is. The movie's pretty good as it is for me.
I think it's fair. It's pretty good. And like I said, I definitely do agree that it is above average.
It's not distracting to me. There are certain movies that the bad choices they make are distracting.
Oh, no. And some are painful.
Yes. This movie did not suffer from that.
Thanks for joining us. We're always excited to create experiences to bring our cinema community together.
Watch the notifications for our weekly show, Movies and More, where we will have more movie reviews, the latest Hollywood news, and commentary with snark, meant to amuse.
Please remember to like, subscribe, and to share our channel.
If you enjoyed this movie review, you might click the link to check out our review of The Hunger Games, The Ballad of Songbirds and Snakes, or click the other link to watch our weekend show, where we reviewed Dream Scenario.
Remember, cinema community movies are better together. Thanks for watching. See you in the next review.